What up, ladies and gentlemen, Chen here bringing you guys in our video. Today's video is going to be mid versus top, which lane is better for Vladimir. Now, a lot of you have requested this ever since the very beginning of my YouTube, and for some weird reason I have not posted it. So here we are today. I have created and comprised of pros and cons of each role, and then at the end I am going to tell you which role is better, which is mid. If you couldn't already tell by stats and just everything and what I play, mid is better, but I'll break it down for you guys. And I'm not saying that top is bad by any means. They are two completely different playstyles. So watching this video, hopefully it'll give you insight on what you like to play more, how you like to play, and just all of that good stuff. So without further ado, if you find this video useful, make sure to smash the like button, join the Crimson Pack by subscribing to the channel. Let's get right into it. Alright, so I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to talk about the cons first, and then I'll talk about the pros, just because I feel as if it's easier to start off with the cons of the specific role. So keep in mind, this is all focused on Vladimir. Although, yes, some of these points are the lane in general, this is more focused on what Vladimir likes and how it fits his playstyle. So, starting with the cons of top lane, very first one I have is isolation. Top lane is very isolated. You can see a lot of people title it as a quote-unquote island, and that's just because it kind of is. It's purely a 1v1 in a lot of cases. Sometimes you'll get jungle help, but a lot of the times you're actually not going to get that sort of help. You're kind of by yourself, and you have to play by yourself. Now, how that implies to Vladimir, well, it means a couple things. First and foremost, you're not going to have as much help to get bailed out as you would, say, in the mid lane for a lot of hard matchups or any of that sort of thing, potentially bad wave state. You don't have that luxury. A lot of the times, junglers are simply just going to ignore you and play off the other lanes. This is just what's going to happen. Obviously, this isn't every single case. Some junglers like to play off top, some just completely ignore it. But you have to go into the top lane mentality as quote-unquote weak side, right? And Vladimir, although he can strive in this environment, it isn't really ideal for him, and we'll actually talk about that when talking about the pros of top. Next con I have is the long lane. It's as self-explanatory as it is. The lane is significantly longer. This means a couple things. First and foremost, wave management is very important. If you fuck up your wave and the enemy is freezing, you have, once again, no real way of getting bailed out, especially if your jungler is not cognizant of the fact that your wave is fucked, and you're just going to be losing so much. When it comes to Vladimir being such a resource-intensive champion that requires a ton of resources to actually become a champion, this is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because you have a long lane to poke and, you know, chase them down in specific cases, but more or less it's a bad thing because you're gonna fuck up your wave, you're gonna be overextended, you're going to be very prone to jungle ganks, and just a lot of those cancerous champions that strive much better in the longer lane. For example, Akali and Irelia straight up come to mind. In mid lane, you don't have to worry too much. You're near your tower. They can't really extend as far as they can in the top lane. Next con, and this is the most obvious one that I can't stress enough, is top lane is the home of bruisers and tanks. Now, if you know anything about Vlad, if you play Vlad, you know he is a champion that does not do great at stat checking. He is more of a bursty type mage, and if you're dueling, more or less, these tanks and bruisers are actually going to stat check you and just straight up beat you. There's not much you can do. Now, granted, some of these matchups are quote-unquote free matchups, right? Because you're just freely scaling, and that's going to go into the pros. But more or less, it's just not going to be a fun time. You're going to get one-shot by tanks that you didn't know could happen, or bruisers, like any of those cancerous bruisers with high base stats and just infinite lifesteal, you're not going to beat them, and it's going to be a very, very hard time. So more or less, top lane has significantly more hard counters than mid lane. I honestly, just because I'm a noob at top, I honestly believe like 98% of top lane champs counter Vlad, in my opinion, but that's just me. It's not a fun time. These classes of tanks and bruisers straight up demolish Vladimir, and there's nothing you can do about it. Next con is the less snowball potential. This is going in the perspective of top versus mid. Obviously, there are some snowball potential, right? If the enemy top is just straight up inting it, you're gonna snowball pretty well. But in terms of mid lane, right? You're in the mid lane, you're closer to the fights, you have more chance to snowball. In the top lane, you have less chances, and this plays a very big part, especially in this season, because Vladimir relies on snowballing. If he's not getting fed early game, he's not going to reach late game in an impactful manner. And especially with the changes to the items, less AP, less damage, he's going to struggle if you play him more towards the scaling playstyle. So this is a very, very big con. And the last con I have of top lane is you're more or less forced to take TP. Like I said earlier, if you get put into a very bad spot, TP is needed to bail you out. This is a con because, as mentioned earlier, less snowball potential. Ignite is super, super critical to actually snowball your lane. Vladimir, although doesn't have the best early game, a lot of times can cheese out early kills, and you kind of need Ignite to do that. So it's not necessarily a con because there is a lot of good in TP, but in terms of snowball potential, TP will slow your snowball potential significantly. Alright, so now we're going to move into the cons of mid lane. Like I said, not going to do in like specific order, we're just going to do cons and then pros first, so it's kind of going to go in that sort of order. Now the cons of mid lane, I don't have much, alright, and you know, I thought thoroughly about the cons, and I seriously just couldn't think of a whole lot, but very first, and I think this is like the biggest con of playing Vladimir mid lane, is you're simply going to have less priority than most other champions. Now, I'm not saying this is the case for every single game, but majority of the cases, you're just not going to have prio. And a very important thing to know about mid lane is it's a constant trade for prio between you and the enemy mid laner, going into roaming, jungle help, scuttle fights, just about anything. Priority matters the most, and although this is such a big con, the very experienced Vlad players will be able to get that prio some way, somehow, and make Vlad mid work. So yes, this is a big con of mid. No, it's not detrimental to the gameplay. Next con we have is being outranged by most mages. This is a no-brainer. Top lane, majority of those champs are melee. Mid lane, majority of those champs are cancerous 700 range champions, right? And yes, it is pretty cancer to deal with, as Vladimir has literally no way of dealing with these sort of champions in theory, but as mentioned earlier, if you become good, you will actually find ways to deal with these, like Cassiopeia, Orianna, Anivia, those type of champs that just significantly outrange you. Yes, it's a hard time and you're going to struggle, but it's not completely impossible. You have ways to outplay, you have windows where you can actually do stuff, so very important to keep that in mind. And the third and last con I have for the mid lane is you having less time to CS. This isn't really quote-unquote a con, I would say, but in terms of pacing of the game, you will have to move around significantly more than top lane, so your CS will not look as great as it would if you played top. Now, this doesn't go for every case. If you see Elite 500, he's still going to average 10.0 CS per minute, but that's because he's extremely not human when playing Vlad. So for majority of Vlad mid players, you're going to find that you struggle with CS or you're going to struggle with pacing, right? Sometimes you're not going to go into these fights, you're going to focus on CSing, and you have to find a good balance to actually make Vlad mid effective. Alright, so now we are going to move on to the pros of the said lanes. The pros of top I have as listed. like I said earlier, isolated lane, it's both a pro and a con. It's a pro because, like I said, if the enemy top laner is just completely griefing and you're able to snowball early game, maybe get first blood and then keep on killing them, you're going to be an absolute beast in the team fights, and that's definitely a pro. Furthermore, if you take Ghost, or it's just a much longer lane, so you have time or availability to actually poke them out and subsequently kill them, especially if the wave is near your tower. The longer lane means that you can kill them easily. Now, also isolated means that you're gonna be less focused on where the enemy jungler is, because 99% of the time you only have to ward the bush near, I don't know how to describe it. You only have to really ward 2 areas to cover jungle ganks. Meanwhile, in the mid lane, there's like 10-20 different wards you can do, and 90% of the time they're not even going to cover the jungle. So keep that in mind. Very isolated, and kind of goes into my second pros of top, which is literally the only pros I have of top, is that it's a free scale on paper. If you play Vlad top, you probably know that's not true, but on paper it is a free scale because of the isolation and because of the fact that you're laning against champions that necessarily can't kill you, even though some tanks that have insane stats will actually be able to kill you. But anyways, that's all the pros I have of top. Moving on to mid, you're gonna see I have a lot. And this just plays into the fact that mid's better than top. Not personal opinion, this is just facts. Come on, guys. You can literally look into any stat page, anything. Mid is just better than top if it's Vladimir's playstyle. But let's move on to the pros of mid. So, starting off with the very first pro, we have the larger snowball potential, and this is mainly due to the fact that you're just a jungler's bitch, alright? If you fight 2v2 and win that fight, the game's pretty much over. And as Vladimir, you have a lot of agency to deal with this because of your QEW Ignite. It's going to be plenty of damage to isolate and kill one person in these 2v2 skirmishes. Obviously, this is very situational depending on what jungler you actually have, but keep that in mind. You also just have larger snowball potential because the enemies will be less squishy, or will be more squishy rather. There's a ton of assassins, mages, these type of champions. You have windows to just completely one-shot as a burst mage. Meanwhile, as top lane, it's all tanks, right? They can make a ton of mistakes and it doesn't matter because they're taking no damage. Meanwhile, in the mid lane, every trade matters and every trade equates to something more. So keep that in mind, as you will have a ton more kill potential in the mid lane. Next is easier matchups. If you play Vladimir mid, you'll know this isn't necessarily true because there are a lot of hard matchups. This just comes into the champion identity of Vladimir. Because of him being a hyper scaler, he's not going to have an easy time in lane. This is a no-brainer, right? But in terms of mid versus top, he will have a lot of easier matchups in the mid lane, simply due to the fact that you can have jungle help in those very hard matchups, and also in those hard matchups, like Kassadin, for example, is one of the most known hard matchups, but in my opinion, it's one of the easiest matchups because I just take Electrocute and he stands no chance. So it kind of depends on how you play out the lane and sort of experience as well. In my opinion, you just have so many more easy matchups, easy times in the mid lane compared to the top lane. And this ties into your ability to win every matchup. As mentioned earlier, like I said, jungle help, burst, flash combo, you just have so many more options to kill the enemy mid laner, which ties into your ability to punish mistakes. As mentioned earlier, top lane, full of tanks, full of bruisers, you Q them. If it's an Irelia, she just Qs one minion and heals it all back up, right? Or if it's a tank, you're literally dealing 10 damage, right? In the mid lane, if they overextend, you can punish that mistake through a E auto Q or auto EQ or any sort of combo, and they're going to get chunked. Now, it's not going to do a whole lot of damage in the early game, but towards the late game, they can easily lose half their HP through that sort of combo, so you can punish mistakes extremely easily in the mid lane. Next, pros of mid is just the short lane and the use of towers. As mentioned earlier, Vlad has realistically no easy matchups, and he's going to struggle a lot in terms of pressure, but what you can do is sit under tower, and the enemy can't really do anything. Meanwhile, in the top lane, you can get dove extremely easily because tanks, they can tank the tower and also deal damage. And just the fact that the lane is longer in the top lane, so if you're overextended, you're kind of fucked if they decide to engage on you. Meanwhile, in the mid lane, you have the comfort of your tower to disengage, and that'll save you just a shit ton of times. And the last pros of mid, and this is kind of a big one, it's kind of an advanced one as well, is your ability to use Raptor Camp to heal. A lot of Vladimir players don't use this. You can place a ward and just heal off of the Raptors, easily healing back to full HP off a couple rotations. This is super broken, and if it's something you can do, it just makes Vladimir mid significantly better than top lane. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is the video. In consensus, in conclusion, mid is better than top. I'm sure you already know this, but hopefully this gives you an understanding as to why, and hopefully you guys can pick accordingly based to your strengths and weaknesses. That is it from me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to smash the like button, join the Crimson Pack by subscribing to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all have a great day. Chen out.